Hello friends, welcome to our channel. The drums begin before sunrise, low and steady like a heart that can't rest. People gather in the square, whispering, waiting, watching the palace gates. Today is not a normal day, today is a king will face the truth he ran from all his life. Some say he lost his crown, others say he lost his mind, but the story is darker than both. King Eric was not always feared. Once he was loved, he was young, bright, and full of promise when he first took the throne. He spoke of justice, of fairness, of building a kingdom where no child slept hungry. People believed him, they cheered his name in the streets, and they trusted his voice more than their own doubts and fears. But power is a slow poison, it does not strike at once. It creeps, it whispers, it changes a person in quiet ways. Elric began to listen less and command more. His advisors became silent, his friends became distant, and slowly the king who once cared for his people began to care only for control and his own growing pride. One night, a poor farmer came to the palace gates. His land had been taken by royal order and his family had not food left. He begged for justice. The guards laughed, but the noise reached the king. Alex stepped out, looked at the man, and instead of helping, he ordered him to be punished for disrespecting the crown. That moment changed everything. News spread fast. The people started to fear their king. Markets became quiet. Laughter faded. Every order from the palace felt heavier than the last. Still, no one dared to speak against him. In a land where the king's word was law, even truth became dangerous and silence became the only safe choice. In the palace, mirrors lined the great hall. Elric would walk through them every morning, admiring his reflection. He believed he was chosen, special above all others. His image mattered more than his actions, and while the kingdom outside grew weaker, inside those walls, the king lived in a world built on illusion and empty praise. There was one person who did not stay silent, a royal advisor named Seren, old and wise, had served the throne for years. He saw what the king was becoming. One evening he spoke carefully but honestly. He told Elric that a ruler who ignores his people will one day stand alone with no one left to protect him. Elric did not take the warning well. Anger rose quickly in him. He accused Seren of betrayal, of trying to weaken the crown. The guards were called and the advisors was taken away. Before he left, Seren said one thing calm and clear. A king who refuses to hear truth will one day lose more than his throne. Those words echoed, but Eric pushed them away. He believed fear was stronger than respect. He raised taxes, built bigger walls, and punished even small mistakes. The kingdom started to crack under pressure. Farmers left their lands. Traders stopped coming. Hunger and anger began to grow together like a storm building in silence. Then came the dreams. At first they were small. Elric would see shadows in his sleep, hear distant voices calling his name. He would wake up uneasy but say nothing. Over time the dreams became clearer. He saw a crowd standing in the same square outside his palace. But they were not cheering, they were watching him in silence. In the dream, he stood alone, no crown, no guards, no power, just eyes staring at him, waiting. He would try to speak, but no words came out. Then he would feel something strange, as if something was missing, as if he was not whole. Every time he woke up before he could understand what it meant. Days passed, but the feeling stayed. Eric became restless. He trusted no one. Even his closest servants felt like enemies. He ordered more guards, more control, more rules. But the more he tried to hold power, the more it slipped away from him. Fear was no longer enough to keep a kingdom together. Outside the palace, people began to gather in secret. Small groups at first, then larger ones. They spoke of change, of justice, of ending the rule that had turned their lives into suffering. The story of the farmer, the silence of the adviser, and the growing hunger united them. For the first time, they were no longer afraid. One evening, a young woman stood in the square and spoke loudly. She told the crowd that a king is nothing without his people. Her voice was strong, her words simple but powerful. Others joined her. What started as whispers became voices, and those voices became a movement that could not be ignored anymore. Inside, Eric heard the noise. He climbed to the highest tower and looked down at the square. The sight shocked him, not because of the crowd, but because of their faces. There was no fear left, only determination. For the first time, he felt something he had not felt in years, uncertainty. He called his guards and ordered them to stop the crowd, but something had changed. The guards hesitated. Some stepped back, others lowered their weapons. They had families in the crowd. They had seen the same suffering. Loyalty to the king was no longer stronger than their loyalty to the truth. The king's voice grew louder, but it carried less weight. Orders were ignored. The palace that once felt like a palace of absolute control now felt empty and fragile. Eric realized too late that fear can build walls, but it can't build loyalty, and without loyalty, power is just an illusion waiting to break. That night, the dreams returned, but this time they were different. Clearer, stronger. He stood again in the square. The crowd was closer now. He could see every face, and when he looked down at himself, he understood the feelings. He reached up, but there was nothing above his shoulders. No crown, no face, no identity. He woke up in panic, his heart racing. He rushed to the mirror. His reflection stared back at him, but something felt wrong. For a moment, he did not recognize himself. The king who once saw greatness now saw fear. The man in the mirror looked lost, like someone who had already lost everything that mattered. Morning came, and with it a decision. A square was full again. The people were waiting. This time Eric did not send guards. He walked out himself. No crown on his head, no royal robe, just a man facing the consequences of his choices. The crowd fell silent as he stepped forward. Every step felt heavy, every eye felt like a question he could not answer. He wanted to speak, to explain, to fix what he had broken, but words are weak when actions have caused too much damage. The silence around him was louder than any shout. It held years of pain, anger, and lost trust. Then from the crowd, the young woman stepped forward again. She looked directly at him, not with fear but with strength. She asked a simple question, "Do you understand what you have done?" The king opened his mouth, but no words came. For the first time in his life, he truly did not know what to say. The moment stretched heavy and still. This was not about punishment alone. It was about truth, about facing what he had become. The king who once believed he was above all others now stood equal, exposed and powerless before the very people he had ignored for so long. And in that moment, something inside him finally broke, not his body, not his crown, but the illusion he had lived in for years. He understood now that losing a kingdom is not the worst fate, losing your sense of right and wrong, losing your connection to people, that is the real loss. The story does not end here, because what happens next will decide whether he truly lost everything or if there is still a chance to face the truth and change. But one thing is clear, the king has already lost something far more important than power. The silence in the square felt endless, like time itself had stopped to watch what would happen next. King Eric stood still, his hands empty, his voice gone. The people were no longer shouting, they were waiting, not for orders, not for fear, but for truth. And truth, for the first time, stood in front of him without any protection. Eric lowered his head slowly. It was a small movement, but it carried weight. This was the same man who once demanded others to bow before him. Now he could not even lift his eyes. The crowd noticed. Some felt anger, others felt pain, and a few felt something unexpected, hope that maybe this movement mean change. I was wrong, he finally said, his voice weak but real. The words did not sound like a king, they sounded like a man who had lost his way. There was no excuse, no blame, no pride, just truth. But truth alone is never enough to erase the past, it is only the first step on a long and difficult path. The young woman stepped closer. Being wrong is easy to say, she replied calmly. But people suffered, families broke, lives were lost in silence. Her words were not loud, but they were sharp. They cut deeper than any sword, because they carried the voices of those who could no longer stand there and speak for themselves. Elric listened. This time he did not interrupt, he did not defend himself. He let every word reach him, even when it hurt. For years he had closed his ears to pain. Now he had no choice but to hear it. And the more he listened, the clearer it became. He had not just felt as a king but as a human being. From the crowd, an old man stepped forward. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. He spoke about his son who had been punished unfairly under the king's orders. He trusted his kingdom, and the old man said he believed in justice, but justice never came. The pain in his eyes was impossible to ignore. Then came a mother, holding the hand of her small child. She did not speak much, she only said, "We were hungry sometimes." He The simplest words carry the deepest meaning. Alec felt those words more than anything else. All his grand plans, his strong walls, his power, none of it had fed his people when they needed it most. The king closed his eyes for a moment. The dreams, the warnings, the voices all came together. He understood now what it meant to lose his head. It was not about a crown falling or a life ending. It was about losing wisdom, losing care, losing the ability to see others as equal human beings. "I can't change what I have done," Eric said slowly, "but I can face it." The crowd listened, still unsure. Trust, once broken, does not return easily. It takes time, action, and honesty. Words alone are light, actions carry weight. And everyone in that square was waiting to see which path he would choose. The young woman looked at him carefully, then started by stepping down. She said, the words were direct, clear. There was no anger in her tone, only truth. A king who has lost his way can't lead others. The crowd reacted softly, but no one argued. Deep down, they knew she was right. For a moment, Elric hesitated. The throne had been his identity for so long. Without it, who was he? But then he remembered the mirror, the dreams, the empty feeling. He had already lost himself long before this moment. The crown was only a symbol. The real loss had happened inside him. Slowly he nodded. I will step down, he said. The words felt heavy but also freeing. For the first time in years, he was not holding on to power, he was letting it go. The crowd remained quiet, but something shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a small opening for something new to begin. The guard stood aside as Eric removed the royal ring from his finger and placed it on the ground. It was a simple act but powerful. A clear sign that the rule had ended. No force, no fight, no violence, just a decision. And sometimes the strongest actions are the quietest ones. In the days that followed, the kingdom began to change. A council was formed made of people from different parts of the land. Farmers, traders, workers, voices that had been ignored were now being heard. It was not perfect and it was not easy, but it was a start towards something more balanced and fair. As for Eric, he did not leave the kingdom, he stayed, but not as a king. He walked through the same streets where people once feared him. Some turned away, others looked at him with curiosity. A few spoke to him slowly, carefully. He listened more than he spoke, learning what he had failed to understand before. He worked quietly, helping rebuild what had been broken. No grand speeches, no public displays, just small actions. Day by day, he helped farmers prepare their land. He carried supplies. He stood in long lines like everyone else. Each step was simple but meaningful. This was a different kind of strength. Time passed and stories began to change. Not everyone forgave him, and that was fair. Forgiveness is a choice, not a duty. But people started to see something new in him. Not a ruler, not a symbol of fear, but a man who had faced his mistakes and chosen to take responsibility for them. One evening, as the sun set over the kingdom, Alex stood in the same square where everything had changed. The space felt different now, lighter, alive. Children were playing, people were talking, and life had returned. He watched quietly, understanding that this was what he had once felt to protect. The young woman approached him again. This time her expression was softer. You stayed, she said. It was not a question, it was recognition. Eric nodded. Running would be easier, he replied, but it would mean I learned nothing. She gave a small smile, the first sign of something close to respect. You lost your head once, she said, but maybe you found your heart again. Her words were simple, but they carried meanings. Growth does not erase the past, but it shapes the future. And for the first time, Eric felt that his story was no longer about loss but about understanding. The title of his story remained The King Who Lost His Head. But now people told it differently, not as a warning about power alone, but as a lesson about change, about how losing yourself can happen slowly, and finding yourself can be even harder, but not impossible. Because in the end, the greatest power is not control over others, it is control over yourself. The ability to listen, to change, to accept truth even when it hurts, that is what defines a true leader. Not a crown, not a throne, but the choices they make when no one is forcing them. And that is why this story matters, not because a king fell, but because a human being faced his reflection and chose to change. Many people lost their way, few have the courage to admit it. Even fewer take action to fix it. That is what makes this story worth remembering. So next time you hear about power, think beyond the crown. Think about responsibility, about listening, about staying connected to reality. Because the moment someone believes they are above others, they begin to lose something important, piece by piece, without even realizing it. The drums that once sounded heavy in the morning were now silent. The square was no longer a place of fear, but a place of life, and somewhere in the change, the story found its true ending, not in loss but in growth, not in power but in understanding. Because the king did lose his head once, but in losing it, he finally found something far more valuable himself.